lift my eyes to the hills where my help is coming.
Today we're going to continue our study in the book of Ruth. If you will, turn in your Bibles to the book of Ruth. I was reading an old book last night about the book of Ruth, and it said that the book of Ruth was two love stories. Two love stories. What do you think the author of that book meant when he said that the book of Ruth is two love stories? What's the most evident love story that we usually think about when we think of the book of Ruth?
The love that Ruth has for Naomi.
Okay. The love that Ruth had for Naomi. When I heard the expression love story, I thought of Ruth and Boaz. But this was an old book written in the early 1900s. He said it was a young woman's love for another older woman. Now, in today's society, what would the conclusion be that people would jump to? Homosexual. Yeah. There are so many people in the Bible that are close, like the pairs of people that we're looking at, that books were written claiming homosexuality, which is not true. So the book of Ruth is a love story between Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, and then a rich man's love for a foreigner who was like a dog to the Jews. It's a great story of the love of Boaz and Ruth. Ruth, in the lineage, if you go to the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, you read the lineage of genealogy of Jesus Christ, and you start through, and you normally in genealogies the only people that are listed is men, but in Matthew and Luke there are 4 women mentioned in the genealogy of Christ. Do you know who those 4 women are that are mentioned? Do you know who one of those 4 women are that are mentioned in the genealogy? Okay, good. Ruth. Ruth is one of them. There are 3 others that are mentioned: Tamar, Rahab, and Bathsheba. So you've got what I would say is one virtuous, godly woman, Ruth, Tamar, Bathsheba, and Rahab. All 3 have questionable characters, to say the least. Rahab was a harlot, Tamar very similar, and of course Bathsheba had committed adultery with King David. So you've got 4 women listed, and Ruth, of those 4, Ruth is the one that stands out as being the most pure. Ruth is the grandmother of King David. Ruth is the grandmother of King David. And so you get a better idea of the amazing grace of God in blessing a Gentile to be in the lineage of Christ, and for blessing a Gentile to be the grandmother of King David. We went through Ruth chapter 1 last week. Then we went through the first 8 verses, or 7 verses of the second chapter. We're going to start this morning in Ruth chapter 2. Let's back up to verse 4, because it's important that we remember where Ruth is at this time. Somebody briefly tell me what chapter 1 was about.
It spoke of how Naomi and her husband and 2 children left for another land. And
They left where? They left
Bethlehem, Judah.
They left Bethlehem, Judah, to go to the land of Moab, the Moabites. Okay, which God had commanded them not to do.
Yes.
God had told them.
Their sons found women, found lives, but unfortunately they passed away.
Okay, both.
The husband and 2 boys.
Okay, the husband, Elimelech, died. The 2 sons died. If you go back and study Leviticus chapter 26, you see that the primary cause of famine in a land is when people are going contrary, when God's people are going contrary to his word. One of the things that he sends in the land is a famine in the land. So there was a famine in Bethlehem, Judah. What would have corrected the famine in Bethlehem, Judah?
The people had done what they were told and worked.
People had repented and done what they were supposed to be doing, served the Lord, then that would have, and did eventually, result in the famine not being in Bethlehem, Judah. So Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, and Naomi, they all fled to the land of Moab. Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, the husband and 2 sons of Naomi, died. And then, go ahead, let's start there.
One of the 2 sister-in-laws, she was Naomi was going back to her homeland. She told the 2 sister-in-laws to stay here, but Ruth went with her
Okay.
to Bethlehem, Judah.
Okay, Ruth was going to go back to, Naomi was going to go back to Bethlehem, Judah. She told the 2 daughter-in-laws to go back to their families and to rest with them. Orpah went back, but Ruth went with her mother-in-law. And now Naomi and Ruth, when they arrive in Bethlehem, Judah, start with verse 19, chapter 1, verse 19. Let's read that. This is when Ruth and Naomi have arrived back in Bethlehem, Judah. Go ahead.
So they too went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said, "Is this Naomi?"
Okay, do you know about how long Naomi and her family had been away from Bethlehem, Judah?
10 years.
Okay, about 10 years, maybe over 10 years they had been away. So when they come back, the people gathered around Naomi and said, "Is this Naomi?" Verse 20.
And she said unto them, "Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me."
Okay, now the word or the name Naomi means pleasant. The word Naomi means pleasant. The name Mara means bitter. When she left Bethlehem, Judah, everything was pleasant in her life. She had her husband and her 2 sons. Now she comes back, she's very bitter. So she said, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter. "For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me." Did Naomi understand that the things that she had experienced, the loss that she had experienced, was because of her disobedience to God? It was the judgments of God upon her because of her and her family's rebellion against God and the laws of God and the Word of God. I mentioned that Leviticus 26 says that famine is caused by the people of God disobeying God. The second thing that was against the law of God that they did was those 2 sons married Gentiles. If you read Deuteronomy, you'll see that God commanded the children of Israel not to marry the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Moabites. They were not to marry them. So you've got a double portion of evil that was going on in their lives. Verse 21 now.
I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me?
Okay. Did she know that the suffering she had experienced was a result of their disobedience, and it was not just happen chance, but rather the judgments of God? Very clear. Okay, go to chapter 2 now. Ruth chapter 2, starting with verse 4.
And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless thee."
Does anything stand out there where, now Boaz is an extremely rich man, and he says to his reapers, "The Lord be with you," and they answered, "The Lord bless thee." What do you get out of that short conversation?
mutual love and respect for one another.
Okay, mutual love and respect. Even though Boaz was the boss, Boaz owned everything that they were reaping. He owned all that land. Boaz was a godly man and said, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless thee." I think there was a mutual respect and love that Boaz had for his reapers and for his workers. Go ahead, verse 5.
Then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel is this? And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab.
Now, what would have been the normal reaction of Boaz when they told him that beautiful woman you're looking at is a Moabitish woman? What would the normal reaction have been?
Turn up his nose.
Say it again.
Turn up his nose.
He had turned up his nose. He was like a dog. Gentiles were like dogs to Jews. So normally you would expect Boaz to immediately, even though she was a beautiful woman and he was attracted to her physically, you would normally expect him to turn away and pay no more attention to her. When he was told that Ruth was the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi. Read verse 7.
And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came, and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house.
And who was it that she said, in verse 7, the beginning of the 7th verse, and she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. That was not her speaking to Boaz, but who was she speaking to there?
The servant that was over the...
That's right, the servant that was over the reapers. She says to that servant, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. Tell me again, what is gleaning? Whenever you go into a field and glean, what do you do?
Pick up the leftovers.
Picking up the leftovers, okay? And she says, let me glean among the sheaves. So she came and continued until now that she tarried a little in the house. Go ahead. Verse 8.
Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens.
All right, now, we skipped over something that we touched on last week. I want to go back because it's very, very important. Go back to chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2, starting with verse 2. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. She said unto her, go, my daughter. What was the meaning that Ruth had when she said, let me just go ahead and tell you, she did not have Boaz in her mind at all. She says, let me go out and let me glean in the field, glean the ears of corn, after him in whose sight I shall find grace. What's she saying there? What is she saying to Naomi?
God will show me grace and provide.
Okay, God's going to touch somebody's heart and let me glean. I'll find grace in the eyes of some man, and he will allow me to do that. When she went out into the fields, there were many fields that were next to each other, and the field that she, Scripture says, happened to go to was Boaz's field. Now, who was guiding her when she went out to start reaping? Who was guiding her? God was guiding her. And then look at verse 3. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz. What's that mean? Her hap was to fall on Boaz's land. It just happened, right? But it was the guiding hand of God, it was the grace of God that led her to that field. And then God touched Boaz's heart. Verse 8.
Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my neighbors. Let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels, and drink of that which the young men have drawn.
Okay, it was not uncommon for the men that were reapers in the field, if there was a woman, that she would be abused. So Boaz specifically told his servants, reapers, don't touch her, leave her alone. Verse 10.
Then she fell on her face, and bowed herself to the ground, and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger?
Okay, now, what does verse 10 refer you back to? When she says, why have I found grace in thine eyes?
Back to verse 2.
All right, back to verse 2. She said to Naomi, let me go and glean in the fields, and there will be a man whose sight I shall find grace. And now that Boaz is showing grace toward Ruth, she asked him, why have I found grace in thy sight, that thou shouldest acknowledge me, seeing I am a stranger? Go ahead.
And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband.
Now, what would you have thought would have been the first thing that Boaz would have said to Ruth when she asked, why have I found grace in your sight? What would have been the reason that most men would have been attracted to Ruth?
Because she was pretty.
Because she was pretty. That would have been the primary reason. That wasn't Boaz's reason. He says, I'm showing grace to you because it's been shown to me all that you've done to your mother-in-law since the death of thine husband. Keep reading.
And how thou hast left thy father and thy mother in the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore.
Keep reading.
The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust.
Okay. Had Ruth really trusted in the Lord? Absolutely. When she went out into those fields, and she says, I'm going to go out into those fields and I'll find grace in the eyes of some owner of those fields, some man in those fields. I'll find grace in some man's eyes. Did she know what she was doing when she picked the field of Boaz? I don't think she understood, but she chose that field under the leadership of the Spirit of God. And she was trusting in the Lord. Go ahead.
Then she said, Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid, though I be not like unto one of thine handmaids.
Okay. What was the main thing Ruth is talking about in this verse? Which she said, I'm not like one of your handmaidens.
She's Moabite.
Okay, she was a Moabite, she was a Gentile. All the rest of his handmaidens would have been Jews. Go ahead, verse 14.
And Boaz said unto her, At mealtime come thou hither, and eat the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed, and left.
This is at the meal. She sat beside the reapers, and he reached, that Boaz reached her parched corn, and she did eat. He gave her parched corn, and she was sufficed. She was sufficiently filled. Verse 15.
And when she was risen up to go, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, Let her glean among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall some of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them, that she may glean them.
What's the beautiful expression in verse 16?
He's telling them to fumble a little bit.
Say it again.
So he's telling them to fumble a little bit so she can have a little more better, maybe a better stock. pull from.
Okay. Let fall also some of the handfuls of purpose for her. On purpose, drop a lot of corn for her. On purpose, drop a lot of food for her, that she may glean them and rebuke her not. He was going to be intentionally giving Ruth food that none of the other reapers or none of the other servants, none of the other gleaners would be getting. Go to verse 17.
So she gleaned in the field until even, and beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley.
Go ahead.
And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where broughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, A man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, The man is near of kin unto us, one of our next kinsmen.
Okay. What did Naomi mean when she said in verse 20, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead? He was showing kindness to the living and to the dead. What did he mean there?
His family that was dead.
Okay, the family that was dead, Elimelech was,
And Naomi.
Boaz was a near kinsman to Elimelech. And so you have shown kindness to the dead, to Elimelech, and to his two sons by helping Ruth and Naomi. And you've shown kindness to the living, both to Ruth and Naomi. So he'd been showing kindness to the living and to the dead. Can you think of any other place in the Bible where a man was very, very kind to the descendants of another man because of his great love for the other man, after the other man died?
David to Mephibosheth.
Right. Remember, David wanted to find somebody to manifest his love for, and Mephibosheth was the descendant of whom? Jonathan. Mephibosheth was the descendant of Jonathan. Why did David love Jonathan? Well, we don't know why, but David loved Jonathan with all his heart. And so when Jonathan died, he wanted to show kindness towards some of the descendants of Jonathan. So they found Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth was brought into David's house, lived in David's house, ate at the king's table. Very similar thing here. David was showing kindness to a descendant of Jonathan, and here Boaz is showing kindness to the descendants of Elimelech and Mahlon and Chilion. Tell me anything in the earlier part of this chapter, anything that stands out. There are several different beautiful pictures in the earlier part of the chapter. Tell me anything, if you're going to pick out the most significant statement or picture or truth in the earlier part of this chapter. What stands out in your mind?
That she happened in Boaz's field.
Okay, I think that's one of the most beautiful statements is she happened into Boaz's field. Okay? So many times in our lives, we just happen to be at the right place at the right time. And when we look back, we realize, wow, God was working and directing in a very special way. So that's a beautiful statement. She happened to be lighting in Boaz's field. What's another truth or beauty in the second chapter, earlier part of the second chapter?
I think in 11 and 12, and
Boaz commends Ruth for being dedicated to Naomi and dedicated to somebody who's living for truth and wanting to mentor somebody.
Okay.
And listening to somebody that's done it the right way.
Boaz was full of love for Ruth because of her faithfulness to her mother-in-law and leading her. Notice he says in verse 11, thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come to a people which thou knewest not heretofore. Does that remind you of anyone else in the Bible? God called on a man to leave his father and his mother and the land of his nativity and go to a place God would show him, Abraham. So you see in Ruth, you see the same kind of faith that Abraham had. When God called Abraham and told him to leave everything, go to a place he would show him. It was a place he'd never been before. And now we find Ruth doing the same thing. She's leaving the land of her nativity and has come to a people that she had never known before. Start with verse 21.
And Ruth the Moabitess said, He said unto me also, Thou shalt keep fast by my young men until they have ended all my harvest.
Who is she talking to?
Naomi.
Okay. Go ahead. Now, why did Boaz tell Ruth to stay close to his young men, his servants? Why did he tell her to do that?
So that she could pick up the harvest that they dropped.
Okay, one purpose would be because she would be able to pick up the handfuls of purpose that they dropped. That would be one. Why else would Boaz instruct her to stay close to his kinsmen?
Because he had commanded them not to touch her.
Because he had commanded those kinsmen not to touch her, and they would also be protecting her from any other men who tried to touch her. All right, go ahead. Verse 22.
And Naomi said unto Ruth, her daughter-in-law, It is good, my daughter, that thou go out with his handmaidens, that they meet thee not in any other field. So she kept fast by the maidens of Boaz, clean unto the end of barley harvest and of wheat harvest, and dwelt with her mother-in-law.
Okay. In chapter 3, well, we're going to go ahead and start into chapter 3. Chapter 3 is going to look at Naomi's instruction to Ruth, and Ruth is going to lie at Boaz's feet. Now, let me tell you, there was not a sexual encounter between Ruth and Boaz prior to their marriage. Let's look at this picture of the humility of Naomi and Ruth as they begin to have a great love and respect for Boaz. Chapter 3, verse 1. Did you begin there?
Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast. Behold, he wended with barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me I will do. And she went down unto the floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn, and she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, Who art thou? And she answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thy handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich.
Okay, does anybody know when Boaz said that he was her kinsman? What does that mean? In biblical times, in these times, when a man died, his brother would take his brother's wife and completely provide for her and his children. She would sometimes become his wife. The near kinsman would take her. But now there was another kinsman that was closer than Boaz, and he had the first option to take Ruth. But when Boaz showed an interest in Ruth, he went to that nearest kinsman and said to the nearest kinsman, do you want Ruth? And he said, no, I don't want her. You can have her. So there was a biblical, legal reason that Boaz could end up with Ruth. Go ahead, verse 11.
And now, my daughter, fear not, I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning. And if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of a kinsman to thee. As the Lord liveth, lie down until the morning.
All right, so what is Boaz telling Ruth in those verses there?
She's going to go to the other man and offer her to him.
Yes, okay.
And if he doesn't accept, he'll do it.
Right. Go ahead, verse 14.
And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came into the floor. Also he said, bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley, and laid it on her, and she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, who art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley gave he me. For he said to me, go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. Then said she, sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. The man will not be in rest until he have finished the thing this day.
Okay, what is Naomi telling Ruth in that last verse? She said to wait, but now did she wait to see how it all turns out, or did she know how it was going to turn out?
She knew her.
Okay. Then said she, sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he hath finished the thing this day. Naomi is telling Ruth, Boaz is going to do everything that he has to do to have you. And he's not going to let the sun go down until he gets it all taken care of. Okay? Chapter 4. Now we'll start with chapter 4 next week. Our time is up. Tell me anything in chapter 3 that stands out.
Ruth's obedience.
Ruth's what?
Obedience.
Okay, Ruth's obedience to
Naomi.
Naomi. Okay. Ruth's obedience to Naomi. Anyone see anything else in that chapter that stands out to you?
Boaz's character. He's going to do it the right way.
Okay, all right. The character integrity of Boaz is beyond reproach. What else? When they got up in the morning, what did he do for her? What did he give her? He gave her a lot of food to take home with her. Okay. You take chapters 1, 2, and 3. Somebody tell me, why do you think this book is in the Bible? Why is the book of Ruth in the Scriptures? What are the main lessons for God's people from the book of Ruth?
One lesson could be that if we are obedient, we'll be rewarded. God will take care of us.
Okay. If we do what's right, we're obedient, do what God would have us to do, God's going to take care of us. That the providential care of God for Ruth is one of the main pictures in the book of Ruth. And God will take care of us, just as he took care of Ruth. What else stands out is a reason that God has the book of Ruth. I think one of the reasons is as you look at the lineage in Christ's lineage, you see that Ruth is King David's grandmother, and you see that the other women that are mentioned in the lineage, they were ungodly women. The book of Ruth shows the purity not only of Boaz, but also of Ruth. And it's a beautiful picture of a very, very godly woman. It was beautiful, and a woman that was provided for by God through a man of God, a Jew taking care of a Gentile. Anyone have any other thoughts from the first three chapters? What do you think is going to happen? Those of you that have not read chapter 4, what do you think is going to happen in chapter 4? We'll almost find out. All right, thank you all for being here. Somebody tell me one more time, why are we reading the book of Ruth? Why are we, every other pair of people that we've been looking at, we've just looked at the first one and the second one. First one, second one. Looked at the individuals in a pair. Right now we're looking at Ruth and Naomi, but we're not just looking at Naomi or just looking at Ruth. Why is there so much more that we need to look at? If we just read history of Naomi, would we get and understand the beauty of Ruth? I don't think so. All right, thank you all for being here. Lord willing, we'll see you in just a few minutes.